So like Ryan mentioned, I'm the project manager for the consultant team on the Unified Development Ordinance update. Brendan should be there physically there tonight. So Half Associates is the other part of our team. They worked with you on developing your comprehensive plan, the FATE policy manual, so they can hit the ground running on this community and what it needs, what its long-term planning policies are and their implications for the Unified Development Ordinance. So we're thrilled to have them on board. So Brendan's here, Carnell and Abel are also assisting us in evaluating as we go and putting graphics together and that sort of thing. Appearing later, and I think he may join us a little bit late, but he's our fiscal brains on the project. Felix Landry has run some numbers and crunched some numbers in terms of what the metrics we're aiming for here mean in terms of fiscal productivity and resiliency for the city of Fate. And so those are going to feed into what we develop in the Unified Development Ordinance. But our scope of services specifically talk about codifying your fiscal tool. That can mean a lot of different things, and so we're still at the exploratory stage in terms of what that actually means when we draft amendments to your Unified Development Ordinance. But Felix is going to help us out on that. So, Ryan, if you could advance to the next slide, please. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit. Brennan's going to come up first and talk about, once I introduce you to the project, he's going to talk about the themes in your comprehensive plan and what they mean for a development code. It's important because comprehensive plans are not self-executing, at least in the state of Texas. They are really only long-term policy until you put in place development standards that implement them. So that's why this part of what you've done, and I always see this as one process. You're developing your long-term planning policies and then putting in place the tools to implement them is sort of one thing. So this is the implementation phase of all of that. He's going to talk to you a bit about this concept known as the public-private productivity ratio, which is encouraging development patterns that really get you more bang for your buck in terms of the productivity and the fiscal productivity, especially of land use and land development in Fate. Brendan's going to talk to you about the crosswalk between your zoning districts and the future land use policies or the long-range policies in your comprehensive plan, the new, how we're going to look at and how we're thinking about realigning your zoning districts to implement them, along with development standards like street types. And then Felix is going to talk to you about how we integrate this with your fiscal, with fiscal considerations. Brendan's going to talk to you about the document layout and how we can reconfigure the zoning districts so that they present a more effective tool and a tool that is more meaningful for people who use your Unified Development Ordinance in really producing the development outcomes that the policy manual, your comprehensive plan, talk about. And then I'm gonna finalize this with non-conformities, and the reason why is it's probably the least exciting thing you're going to hear about tonight. So I get to do the boring stuff last, but it's important. Yeah, how we deal with development on the ground that was lawfully built there, but no longer complies in one way or another. With the Unified Development Ordinance is important. It's important on a day-to-day basis. So we're going to hit on that too. That's part of our scope. Next slide, please. We've divided the work we're doing into 3 modules because this is a big project. And this is a partial update of Unified Development Ordinance. We're not completely rewriting the whole thing. We're just surgically amending it in a way that implements your comprehensive plan, and especially the things that came out of the Incremental Development Alliances audit. So we divided this into 3 buckets so we could focus on these one at a time. And the first one are some early fixes and just some ways to get us into the project and to start to think about what it's going to take to shape the rest of the Unified Development Ordinance. So these are some early fixes like the Fiscal Framework, developing that integration between your long-range planning policies and how your zoning districts are structured, ways to get more productivity per square foot and per acre from development in the city, as well as non-conformities. The second bucket, or the second module, are some additional provisions that are important but don't flow directly, all of them, some of them do, but don't flow directly from that audit that was done. Some changes to your floodplain overlay, some changes to block length standards and pedestrian connectivity, because walkability and accommodating walkability in new development is very important to what's in your comprehensive plan and the IDA audit. Things like home occupations, residential anti-monotony provisions, things to make sure that new residential units that are built reflect the character talked about in the plan. Streamlining your permitting process or making it work more efficiently and in a way that's transparent, and sign regulations. And that's something I'll deal with because it's something I've dealt with a lot since 2015 when there was a major U.S. Supreme Court case that changed the standards that communities have to think about when they update their sign codes. So we will hit that in the second module. Then the third one addresses all the things that were talked about in the Incremental Development Alliance, or IDA audit. The downtown design, making sure that reflects the character of development in the comprehensive plan, mixed use design outside of downtown and on the fringe of downtown, making sure the use table is both comprehensive but also tamed in a way that's and calibrated in a way that relates directly to these new districts, making sure that things that can be land hogs and can sometimes inhibit fiscal productivity, like landscaping and parking, are dealt with, so that they're the right landscaping and the right parking in the right place in the city, and any additional tools we can think of to enhance the productivity of new development in FATE. Before I move on, are there any questions about the scope of services that I've talked about and where we're headed with this project? Okay, hearing none. Ryan, can you move to the next slide? Okay, so here's the schedule. We're looking at having all this done by November. As I mentioned, we have 3 modules. We hope to finish the first one in May, the second one in July, and so we'll start drafting and analyzing it this month, and then the third one, July through September. Those ones you'll just have drafts in front of you to review, to comment on. We'll put a consolidated draft of all of this together in September, and then it goes through the adoption process. And those of you who are old hands on the Planning and Zoning Commission already know this. If you're new, to get anything adopted in the Unified Development Ordinance in Texas, it has to go through you all for a recommendation, and then it goes to the town council for adoption, or your elected officials for adoption. So there are plenty of opportunities through this process for folks to review what we've done, and to comment, and to reshape all of this before it lands on your doorstep for adoption. Next slide, please. And this is a slide I use quite a bit when I talk to communities around the country about code updates. And just so you know, our firm, and I have Justin Wallace with me on the line here tonight too. If you can wave at him, Justin, go ahead. We do development code updates like this all over the country. We've done about 150 of them in 36 different states, including Texas. So I show this a lot, that any good code or ordinance begins with a good plan. We have to understand what our long-term planning policies are. We have to understand what it is we're doing, what the scope of our project is, what we're doing, what we're not doing as part of all this. And then we have to diagnose, the existing regulations, how they line up with the long-range policies in your plan, how they don't line up with the long-range policies in your plan, what we need to do to get there. And you've already done that. You've developed that your policy manual, which is your comprehensive plan. You brought IDA in to talk to you about what some shortcomings are in your existing UDO in terms of getting the kind of development you said you want to get in the comprehensive plan. And we are in the step kind of in the middle on the bottom left-hand side. We're actually writing all of this up right now and talking about what tools we need to implement the plan and writing the language and the graphics. Brennan will talk to you about that a little later, that will achieve that outcome. So next slide, please. So now I'm going to do a forward pass to Brennan, and he's going to take the ball and move it downfield by talking about how all this relates to the comprehensive plan, his crosswalk analysis, and what this means in terms of development districts. So Brennan, if you don't mind,
cool.
Go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you, Mark, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure being back in this wonderful building. So I recognize several of you as we went through the comprehensive plan process, and welcome aboard new members as well. Excited to be working with you guys as well on this exciting project. And you know, as Mark said, I commend you as a community to take this next step. Many times when we get through a planning process like a comprehensive plan, you know, this is the next step, and I commend you guys to taking that next step immediately to ensure that the recommendations that we identified when we worked on your comprehensive plan are being implemented correctly into your code, and makes Ryan and his team's life a lot easier moving forward as well. So wanted just to bring a brief update. You know, again, we were just here last November when we got this plan adopted for you all, and I know there's a couple of new members, so we just wanted to bring a brief update to you all about some of the themes that were in the Forward Fate Comprehensive Plan. I think we brought a couple copies this evening of the policy document for members that just joined the Plan Commission, so feel free to answer any questions along the way as we go through there. But some of the things that we identified was really aligning your UDO with the comprehensive plan. And again, I commend you guys in the sense of every single time a community goes through this process, there's always going to be some changes, you know, to your UDO to ensure that, you know, it's connected, it meets the vision of the community, and you have your land use regulations in place that align with the vision of the community. So that's one of the overall themes, you know, and working through that process here as well. Incorporating the strong town principles and concepts, including provisions for missing middle housing and incremental development. That was one of your underlying themes all the way through the planning process, if you recall. I commend, and I know Justin and his staff is behind me this evening as well, the education that you guys have done over the last couple of years with the Strong Town movement, and ensuring that you guys are forward thinking when it comes to land use decisions in this community. You know, you're very fortunate to be in that second tier of the DFW Metroplex of development, but you know, protecting and being proactive of ensuring that it's not always falling on your residents of how you're going to pay for your infrastructure in your future. You're making wise choices now about ensuring that you maximize your land use value as part of your development, and you're really taking a look at that. You're not just haphazardly allowing, you know, 1,000, 2,000 lot subdivisions without at least having a fiscal lens in to overlooking a lot or overseeing a lot of those development opportunities. So as part of this process, we're excited to be able to take a concept that has been national, incorporate it into your comprehensive plan, and now we get the opportunity to incorporate it into your UDO as well. One thing we wanted to look at is enhancing your design and performance standards in special districts. And when we say special districts, you'll probably hear the word this evening of character districts. This is really as it relates to more of your mixed-use development. You know, you have some standards in place right now. For instance, like in your downtown, you have your old town core. As part of the planning process, we identified, we created some focus area plans for you all along I-30 and downtown as well, which had some specific standards in place there that we were recommending from the built environment. You have a theme, you have a vision for how you want pedestrians to interact with the street and the buildings to interact with the roads and create that welcoming and live, work, play type of environment. So how do we incorporate some of those standards into your UDO as well? So it brings predictability. That is one of the big things, is bringing predictability to this planning process. Hopefully it makes your life easier as a planning commission when looking and reviewing development. So hopefully also makes Ryan's life a little bit easier when he's talking with the developers, and they have, because you have such a clear vision of what you want your community to be and what you want your public realm to be in your built environment, makes life a lot easier for developers because you have a true vision in place. Prioritize walkability in all the zoning districts. I think that's one key thing is some of your standard development patterns may be more auto-centric, and again, aligning back to your strong towns principles when we look at trying, going back in time and making more walkable environments. How do we prioritize that from the pedestrian realm standpoint? One thing that we heard loud and clear throughout the planning process, and I confirmed with the IDA report that was recently done, was creating a more user and resident-friendly document. You go through your UDO right now, it's challenging sometimes to read it. I spent 15 years in the public sector. Carnell is right behind me and has spent 8 years in the public sector as well. And as much as I am a nerd reading codes, it still is challenging some days to look at some of those. And I can only imagine what it is for your side of the table as well. So this planning process is really to hopefully simplify some of those things for you all, and make it more user-friendly and developer resident-friendly as well. So when you open up the document, there's clear instruction of what is the expectation from a landowner or a developer within the community. And then also codifying your fiscal analysis, and we'll get into that in a minute here. That's a little bit more on Ryan's side, along with Justin and the economic development team here, ensuring that as developments come in, from a fiscal lens standpoint, how are they producing from a return on investment? If you do provide incentives or you are putting in public infrastructure, are they generating enough taxes and revenue to be able to pay off that expenditure over time? So how do we incorporate that into this your UDO update as well? So those are some of the high-level themes that were identified within the comprehensive plan. The public-private productivity, this is probably one of the the core values and core principles that we are trying to incorporate into your UDO. Many of you that sat on the Planning Commission, we had multiple joint work sessions with the City Council as well. We went through a scenario planning process. We looked at your community. We heard loud and clear how you wanted your community to grow, and you wanted to focus on not just urban sprawl and continuing the strip out of land, but ensuring that you have strong productivity of the available land and where your infrastructure is today. There are some areas and key areas where you may want to see development grow into the future, but you have put a premium vision on ensuring that you have quality walkable districts and neighborhoods and centers here, while still maintaining and preserving some of your rural character that people moved out in this area to be. So as we went through your planning process and through the comprehensive plan, we generated with our team in Urban 3 about 3 different scenarios. And what you see on the screen here is the preferred scenario that was recommended in the comprehensive plan. And I'll kind of just walk through the left-hand side. We created a series of different place types. If you all remember, the place types are really the kind of the character of what do you want these areas to be. So again, rural reserve obviously is pretty clear. It's kind of just larger lot type of development, maybe a single family home, and then it starts tracking to be more intense as you move towards your rural neighborhood or your suburban neighborhood. A lot of what you have in the community today I would consider your suburban neighborhoods. And then as you get closer to your urban core, as you can see on the map, that's where you get more your better return on investment, your higher intensity type of development, and the opportunity for a little bit more predictability and flexibility as well. On the right-hand side is really kind of the core nuts and bolts of what this planning process really was. When we looked at your total build-out, and we went out to 2040 or 2045 on that planning process, we looked at what the population was going to be, which is going to be over 40,000 people during that time is what we estimated. We ran, and I'm trying to synthesize it down as much as possible. We looked at how much land you could develop potentially, from a scenario perspective. We looked at your value per acre and what that actually meant. We worked with Justin and your team here to identify approximately how much public infrastructure cost was going into per lot. Again, that includes your sewer, your water, your roads, your sidewalks. We looked at your general government costs. Again, what is it costing each year? Because not only are we looking at infrastructure, but we're looking at your police, your fire, and other amenities that you may provide to the community. And we came down to basically a public-private ratio of 1 to 22, which was, again, for every dollar, you're getting $22 of return on investment as part of that development. And you're looking at the overall cost per person. Again, the cost of services you provide to a resident right now is a little bit over $3,000 a year is what it costs. So when Justin and Ryan and the rest of your team and bring a development forward behind the scenes, they're checking to see how that development is is providing economic and fiscal productivity to the community and making recommendations along that line, hopefully to ensure a proper public-to-private ratio. Our goal as part of this UDO is to hopefully calibrate some of your bulk standards and your lot standards to incorporate some of that fiscal into the development standards so that it brings, again, a little bit more predictability into those lot standards. And Felix will go through that a little bit later of kind of the existing analysis of what you guys have here today. A lot of information. Any questions from the Planning Commission so far on those couple themes?
So, I'm sorry, I was just doing some quick math, which is usually dangerous, but the cost per person, is that based on 40,000 residents, our existing 20,000 residents?
Yes. It should be, yes. It should
Existing?
Be no, it should be on the proposed long-term.
Okay, so a proposed long-term, if we're predicting a build-out of 40,000 residents, just quick math, that cost, we're looking at a required budget of about $135 million?
That also includes the infrastructure. So it's general services and the infrastructure
Right.
per person.
Okay. Okay.
Just doing so moving on here, just kind of the UDO audit that we did for Module 1 as part of this. What we identified coming out of the comprehensive plan and aligning it to your UDO is adding some zoning districts where needed to accommodate kind of the middle housing and small-scale commercial development in walkable neighborhoods. That was one of the things that was brought forward, not only during our planning process as part of the comprehensive plan, but your IDA report as well. How do you create kind of those mixed neighborhoods that could still incorporate some of the corner shops that may be attractive to some types of developments, but be able to scale it back from your higher intensity core development near your downtown and your I-30 development and kind of feathering it to the neighborhoods that are around there. Looking to add a district, to include light industrial and professional offices in a mixed-use environment. That was one thing that we heard from the staffing perspective along with this planning process. Right now you have one industrial district, and there needs to be a potential split between kind of light or heavy type of industrial. We renamed some of them to improve the clarity, or recommending we rename some of the districts to improve the clarity and understanding what those districts actually mean. Reorganizing some of them as well, the special districts into kind of a single unified framework. And then there are a couple of districts as we evaluated your zoning map that were not used. So we are recommending removing some districts that are no longer relevant because they're being incorporated and the development patterns being incorporated into other districts. So looking at your existing and proposed residential districts here, we are not recommending any changes as it relates to the specific districts. Now, again, when it comes to the later modules, when we look at lot size and bulk standards and everything else, there may be some changes that come to that. But just from a standpoint right today, we feel comfortable in recommendation of the existing residential districts that you have in place today. We think it accommodates and incorporates what's needed short-term but long-term within your community. Is that, from before I go to the commercial, is there a consensus that you feel that as a plan commission that has reviewed a lot of different residential developments coming to the community that your existing districts today support what you're seeing or what you envision? Okay. So just kind of a little transect of what these different districts would, again, consider what you see. Again, top left is really your agriculture, the larger lots, your residential, rural estate, excuse me. It's kind of like larger lots with single homes, and then as you progress down, you can see how the density starts getting a little bit smaller, a little bit more dense as you move through some of your districts where you get to the R3s and R4s, you got smaller lots, or R4s where you start potentially building in some townhomes, shared wall type of development. When we look at your existing proposed districts for commercial, this is where we start aligning and recommending some changes here. We're recommending deleting professional office. That is more of a use type of district that we feel that can be incorporated, from the use standpoint into all your other commercial districts. We're recommending to keep neighborhood commercial. We feel that's a comfortable district here. Looking to rename your highway commercial to general commercial. We think that As you will see a little bit later on, we have a character district that is going to be more appropriate, we think, for the I-30 corridor. But general commercial does also allow you a little bit more flexibility to be used not just for highway. And I think that really encompasses a lot of the commercial that you have within your community today. We're looking to split, as we mentioned before. Right now, you currently have one industrial district. We are recommending that you add an innovative and light industrial. One of the recommendations in the comprehensive plan along your I-30 focus area was kind of this innovation district. Not looking to do warehouses, but the opportunity to maybe bring in an office park. You didn't really have a district that supported that today. So we feel that doing the innovative and light industrial would support that type of development. And then have a heavy industrial district as well. You do have, I think, some development within the community or some areas that are looking for heavy industrial. So having probably stricter standards specifically to that would be our recommendation for that one. Any questions on the commercial districts?
What's our existing heavy industrial? Is that the power plant, the substation on the south side of town?
Yeah, the actual developed industrial land is just the substation in the southeastern area of the city. We have other land zoned industrial, but is yet to be developed.
Okay.
So part of the changing of this was just to put us in alignment with a standardized naming convention, not just for here, but for other cities as well.
I wouldn't say it would, I mean, it simplifies things. It makes it easier for the developers, correct? But this also is aligning to the recommendation that were coming from your comprehensive plan as well. There was a clear distinction, especially in the industrial, that there was two different types. Again, you didn't really have a business park, or you didn't have any type of, district that would support that. So working with staff, working with the community, we felt, again, that it was advantageous to split those two out, because we knew we are aware of potentially some heavier industrial developments that have been thought of around here, maybe proposed. But again, your I-30 corridor and some of that land along there as well was being identified as an innovation area or business park, and we felt having a different set of standards there would be more applicable to that.
Thank you.
And I guess my question would be, as it relates to separating the two industrials, is just wanting to have a better understanding of what we're looking at with heavy industrial, because I read that and I start thinking larger production facilities, batch plants, things like that. And
Right.
a lot of that in the town with the square footage that we're in just seems like it would be hard to do. And
Yeah,
just because everything's going to be in a fairly close proximity to the neighborhood. So just
For now, right, it
Right.
is. And so this sets up, for the growth of the city as well. There may be opportunities for a heavier industrial use down the road. But what this also does, if you think about the community concerns with the Riding Club Road,
Right.
FLUP, if there's a clarification or a distinction between those really lower impact types of, and even barely calling them industrial uses versus something that would have likely have an impact, noise, odor, something like that. If we distinguish those in the zoning district, that helps to ease the conversation when you're looking at applying, even at the comp plan level. You can
Right.
better distinguish what those opportunities are.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely get that part of it. It's just, I start cringing when I start thinking about heavy industrial here, and especially the prospect of, because I know I've got a couple of customers that are concrete batch plants that would love to be out here, and, just things like that. I guess I would just ask that we consider how we have that code to where we can have the appropriate restrictions, even though we call it heavy industrial, truly what we want, even though it's a heavier type use, more intense type of use.
I have a question. Ryan, it's probably more for you. Montera Industrial District, which category would that fall in? Would that be innovative and light industrial or the heavy industrial?
Well, I can't quite answer because we haven't identified the split quite yet. I mean, what we're likely going to see there is probably leaning more toward the innovative and light industrial. Actually, most likely that's what we're going to see. But we haven't actually gotten into the weeds with identifying where our use table uses fall under the INV versus the IND, or which ones are shared.
I would agree with that, but I remember having some heated discussions when that was, when we gave our blessing to that, more or less, and talking about how there was really no restrictions on that park as we passed it. And so I'm just wondering the process that we're going to have to go through to implement innovative and light industrial on that park specifically.
Well, technically, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, because it cites a specific zoning code in the plan development, even if the zone changes, that historical zoning regulation, as far as the uses go, I believe still would apply into the future. So right now, the PED actually says industrial, uses under the industrial district are what are allowed, subject to these restrictions, like concrete batch plant, for example, was explicitly omitted or excluded from eligibility on that property. So even into the future, even as we change these zones, plan developments that reference a specific zoning code
Right.
Or zoning regulation, that's actually what applies down the road too. But I would say in a very general sense, what we'll likely see happen there is in line with that innovative and light industrial use.
All right, thank you.
Great questions. Just in keeping with your existing districts, we are recommending, as of right now, that we've been going back and forth, but we are recommending to keep your public and parks district along with your institutional and civic district as well as part of your existing code that you have. And then the fourth one that we have is, kind of the existing proposed districts. Right now in your zoning code, I believe they're kind of identified as special districts. We're recommending a name change to character districts. And what we mean, and the reason for that is we really want to reorganize the special districts into a single unified framework. Right now you had your two focus areas, that were part of your original UDO back in 17, 18 that were studied. We advanced that as part of the comprehensive plan. And we feel as we've now are applying not only that focus area to your districts, but it also opens up the opportunity. There may be some other areas where your character standards. When we talk about character standards, this is where you start looking into kind of the bulk standards. You start looking into a little bit more of the look and feel of how the building may look, how the building may approach the street or the sidewalk. You're really focusing more on the public realm side of things. In that manner, we're working back and forth about, and you'll see a little bit later what we're thinking about, when it looks at setbacks. And again, and maybe some of your mixed-use districts, you may only want 2 stories instead of 3 or 1 and things along those lines. But it's really focused on these character districts, really focused on the pedestrian level, which really is going back to the walkability that you guys are looking for in some of these areas. So as you can see here within the districts, for the character districts, we're recommending to rename, what you used to have as highway mixed use to a mixed use commercial. What you used to have as your mixed use transition, we're thinking keeping it or just having it as mixed use transition. We had a mixed use neighborhood. We're recommending to rename it to neighborhood transition. And then we recommend keeping the Old Town Core. I think that's definitely a strong district right now. And at one time, currently you have your Old Town Transition, which I don't believe, looking at the zoning map, you've really used that district. But we feel that as we've gone through this and we've looked at your existing zoning, how these districts could be applied here, we feel we can really capture what the essence of the walkability and the character you're looking for, and really that neighborhood transition. I know we've been back and forth with Ryan and his staff here a little bit about what is the neighborhood transition. Again, we go back to, it's a little bit more of the walkability. We're not looking at recommending single family detached. This could be more of your townhomes. This is kind of that transition where it could be a duplex or a townhome, provides for live work type of situations. But you're looking at more like 4 or less units per 4 or fewer units as part of that development, as part of that transition area.
I'll also add that in addition to live work in this neighborhood transition, we're calling it a transition because it acts as that crossover between a solely residential developed area and a solely commercial developed area. So we do anticipate that within here, we'll also see some small-scale commercial uses. So perhaps a service provider like a lawyer or insurance sales office, even maybe a cafe or coffee shop that can coexist, in harmony with other types of residential uses. So it's going to be a true neighborhood. It's not just going to be a monoculture of any kind of use. And so that's why we took the mixed-use idea, but we wanted it to be applied in a broader geography than just that kind of regional mixed-use area that was defined in 2017 around the highway. This is something that can go up toward the Old Town core as well and accomplish the same thing that we were trying to focus on earlier on. So that neighborhood transition is going to broaden in its application, and that's why we took out the Old Town transition and felt like it's something that would be well replaced as well as be applied elsewhere as well.
Yeah, if you look at, to kind of give you guys a contextual area of where we're thinking, is if you just look at where your current downtown land is and you look at some of the residential that's around it, a lot of it's on gridded streets right now. It's really kind of your old, where Fate grew up. It's where they first started. That's where we would probably see a lot of that neighborhood transition, kind of being on the infill development side of things. But then as we worked with you guys on your focus area for your downtown and that feather down Crawford Street to more of your mixed-use district, there's some opportunities maybe up against the railroad there a little bit once you get into that area where you could have some of that neighborhood or that neighborhood transition as well. Again, to Ryan's point, we're focusing on walkability. We're focusing on not being so auto-dominated, auto-centric. So if you have a corner, cafe or coffee shop or anything else, that would be the type of development you'd be seeing here.
So just to be clear, the main difference I'm seeing in the MUT versus the NT is just the MUT having the potential to have businesses in it, the neighborhood transition strictly being a residential area.
Can you restate that?
So I'm just trying to clarify the difference between the mixed-use transition versus the neighborhood transition. The main difference being the mixed-use transition will have businesses in it, towards the neighborhood transition won't. Essentially, the character of the residential piece will remain the same, but the MUT will have the opportunity to have coffee shop, business, whatever.
It's a scalability. It is, and we'll get some pictures here. Okay, we'll start here. Maybe that might answer your question as well.
Okay.
So when we look at the mixed use, and again, this is looking at, the mixed use commercial. This is where mixed use developments where we see more down on your I-30 corridor. These are just representative images. This is not where we're going exactly. But these are just, ideas of where you would have, your mixed use could be 4 or 5 stories. Again, you're looking, focusing more along your I-30 commercial corridor. That's probably where you see more of the walkable type of mixed use development. When you're looking at the mixed use transition, this is where you start scaling down here. So you start scaling down in the sense of instead of a 5-story building, for example, you'd be scaling down to maybe a 2-story building that would have commercial on the first floor and maybe residential up above, for example, or office up above. This also starts looking at the transition of, your townhomes along those lines as well. And then the neighborhood transition, this is where you start scaling down a little bit further, where again, you're looking at duplexes. We don't have a representative image in here at the moment where you'd have maybe like a corner shop or a cafe that would be on the corner. But again, it's just the transition down in the types of uses and the intensity of what that would look like.
And I will reiterate that when we're talking about mixed use, we are completely receptive to vertical and horizontal mixed use. We're not insisting that it manifests one way or the other.
Again, and these are just the districts. We still have to go through what those setbacks look like, what the built environment looks like. Again, there may be some that has a maximum two stories instead of maybe a maximum of 5. So we still have to get through the standards. We're just right now focusing on what we feel is comfortable and what is fate at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. Any other questions from the plans? And then examples of your Old Town Core. You have a great building right now. I think you have 4 more of your buildings coming here shortly. But again, just representative images of what we see from the Old Town Core. Again, a little bit wider sidewalk, a little bit more mixed-use development as well. One thing that we are also recommending as part of these mixed-use districts, you are going to have kind of, I'll say, primary or secondary type of streets in the focus areas that we identified, depending on the type of character that you are going to have within your area, whether it's Crawford Street, whether it's, for example, Fate Main Street that you have here as well. You have different standards that are out there today of the type of character, how the buildings interact to the road. As part of this planning process, we are going to work with Ryan and the team here to map out kind of your type A streets compared to your type B streets. Again, the reality is what it comes down to at the end of the day is the different type of right-of-ways and the different types of environments that you're looking for. For example, if or when 551 or Crawford gets redeveloped, that's going to have a certain type of street dimension and what type of buildings react to that. Could be an A street or a B street. The nice thing about what we are recommending from a flexibility standpoint is your mixed use transition mixed use could be on A street or B street, but within the regulations, we will have parameters in place of how the buildings need to react to that street area as well. So again, it provides flexibility. So as you will see later on, with the potential recommendation of what we're thinking of how this code could be laid out from a usability standpoint. Again, we would have a street pattern grid built into this code as well so that it would be clear in the sense of what type or what the standards are to the different types of streets that you have, because not everyone is going to be more auto-dominated. You're going to have some side streets that will still support it. You're still going to want to have a nice walkable environment for the pedestrian level standpoint. And then your type C street is, I would say, a little bit more of your localized residential road that would be focused on there as well. So you'll see it's a little bit different type of zoning practice, in that regards, but it'll be clear because you'll have a map and a plan that ties to this as well. And with that, any questions before we turn it over to Felix here? Any questions on what we've laid out for the different districts so far? Does the commission feel comfortable with that? Do you guys think we missed anything as it relates to the different districts, or what you're seeing here, or the challenges that you guys face when making recommendations? Or Ryan, any questions from you?
No, I will just point out that the previous slide with the street types, we're still definitely working through that, but you will recall from our the focus area plan, especially for the downtown, there was a grid pattern and street frontage characters, and so I think we'll use that as the model for how we would apply these street types in the downtown environment at least. And I think they would primarily be focused on areas around Crawford and around I-30, because that's really where we're going to have a little bit more, we'll have intention everywhere, but with some of these different character districts that he was talking about, that's where we can layer it a little bit more with our application.
And I know we've had this conversation in previous presentations that y'all have given us, but I'm assuming we're going to be very intentional on street width and replacement costs and all that, because as I was looking at the type A streets, you're looking at 4-lane roads. Obviously, you've got to move traffic as efficiently as possible, but minimizing the number of those in order to alleviate costs down the road.
Yeah, so I mean, the street width and the number of lanes already factors into our fiscal analysis. And so there will be a relationship with road classification and these street types in our zoning code. And there's a formula that we have in our fiscal analysis that's as a basis on the road classification, local or collector arterial, and what factor there is in the responsibility of the development to consider the cost of that road. So it'll be comprehensive, and there'll be a tie-in with these street types in how we factor in the fiscal analysis for sure.
With that, Felix, are you on?
I am on. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
All right. I'm having a little trouble hearing you guys sometimes, so if y'all have questions, I might need y'all to repeat it.
I will do that for you, Felix.
Okay. And when I want to change slides, do I let you know?
Just tell me next slide. I'm at the computer right now.
All right. Fantastic. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm very excited to be talking with folks from Fate. Again, I've only ever had fantastic experiences with the folks in Fate, so I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to walk us through some of the data metrics that we're going to be looking at with the UDO, and some of the ones we're going to focus on for purposes of the UDO and identifying different things we can do in the development regulations to boost some of the revenue production of the city at large, and also just to have a clear understanding of how the land uses and bulk standards impact the fiscal sustainability of the city. We're mostly going to focus on land uses and bulk standards here. So let me go ahead and get started. You can bring up the first slide, Brendan. Okay, so you guys, being in Fate, are probably familiar with graphics like this. So you've got your land uses along the bottom that are existing in Fate, and then you've got a data table on the top. And what you're seeing in the land uses in the graph at the bottom is you're seeing the total improvement value per lot. And it's a metric you can look at, but one of the things that's going to be key in this is understanding which metrics are going to be most applicable to the UDO and to the bulk standards and uses, and understanding how the uses and bulk standards relate to each other. So in this case, in many scenarios, total value per lot can be a good metric. We're not going to focus on it as much, but you can see something that's kind of expected is that your industrial and commercial uses are going to have higher value lots. Some of that is just due to the fact that they're built to a higher standard. Some of it's due to the fact that they're just really big most of the time. And so in metrics like this, single family and mobile homes and the undeveloped parcels don't do very well. However, if you can go to the next slide, Brennan. When you look at Fate specifically on the revenue per acre, the uses tell a slightly different story, and it's an encouraging story for Fate. So in Fate's example right now, single family homes, as far as revenue per acre goes, are doing really quite well compared to other cities. And some of that has come from the approach you guys have taken to some of your plan developments and the way that you've kind of monitored and regulated single family homes coming in. So that's super encouraging. That's really good stuff. And it's also illustrative of how different some of these metrics can be when you start telling the stories. So currently, the commercial and industrial uses aren't performing quite as high. And there's a couple of factors that are going to go into that. And we'll get into a little bit more detail later. But essentially, some of it is there's just not that much commercial and industrial in Fate right now. And so some of the data points are just a little skewed by a small sample size. And then it's also compared to, other cities more in the center of the Metroplex, a lot of the commercial and industrial uses in Fate have larger lots, and they have lots of surrounding area that's not quite used up yet. And that'll change dramatically over time as Fate continues to develop. So if we can go to the next slide. Okay. So the fun part about doing this with codes and beyond doing the comprehensive plan is that the code gets into the details and it gives some teeth to some of these fiscal analysis metrics, which is a lot of fun to look into. So we have uses, which have different performance metrics, and then we also have bulk standards like lot sizes or setbacks or building heights. And a lot of the best data and a lot of the best metrics we can look at are when those two things kind of come together. So in this case, you have the table that we saw in the last slides, but you have it expanded to include some of the basic bulk metrics. So in this case, what we're looking at are lot sizes. So under the single family column, we have lot sizes in the first section that are less than 6,000 square feet. And then in the category below that, it's 6,000 to 11,000 square foot lots, and 11,000 to 20,000 and so on. And so we broke out single family residential that way, and then we also broke out commercial. It was difficult to look at the industrial lots just because there weren't quite enough to break out into these finer details. But one of the things that's important to notice is when you start to get into more of the details, you start to see a lot more patterns. And so in the single family, one of the patterns you'll notice is that when you look at the revenue per acre column on the far right side, as you go up in lot sizes, your revenue per acre goes down. Even though some of your other value metrics may go up consistently as you get in larger lots, or they may go up and down, there's a very clear pattern on the revenue per acre side. And it's an important one to note because your revenue per acre numbers are going to be the revenue numbers that are most easily relatable to your cost burdens as a city. And so a lot of your cost burdens are reported, like when you guys have cost per person or cost per acre, it's usually a per capita measurement. So it's important to match up your revenue metrics with the way that you're measuring your cost burdens. So there's a clear trend in both the single family and the commercial lots that there are patterns when you get into lot sizes. So that's a really important bulk standard to consider when you're looking at your UDO and the fiscal impact it can have. You can go on to the next slide, Brennan. So we're zooming in a bit more again, and this is your single family patterns. And so we focused in on that table, and you can see the revenue per acre is going down as the lot sizes go up, and you can see that in the chart, the golden line going left to right. It gets lower in value. But what you have in the bars is you have the improvement value per lot. And so what that value is when the property taxes are added up, they're going to evaluate the structure itself, which is the improvement, and then the dirt. And then they add those two together, and that's your overall value. And so oftentimes it's easy to get into this idea that, well, if we just have more expensive buildings, it's enough to get more revenue out of a project. And it's true, the building is going to generate more property, but it's really important to keep it linked up to the size of the lot and to the bulk standards. And so in this case, you can see there's not quite the same relationship in the improvement value per lot as we go across the chart. It goes up at first and then it goes back down. Go on to the next slide, Brennan. So these are the commercial lots, and there's some interesting tidbits to get into on the commercial side. You can see for everything except the 20,000 to 40,000 square foot lots that there is the same trend of the revenue per acre going down as you increase in lot size. But there's this outlier, right? And so the outlier really comes into your downtown. When I saw these, it's a little out of the ordinary from what it typically looks like. But what's happening is that the two lots that are in that 20 to 40,000 square foot category are actually in your downtown, which is a bit out of the norm for a lot of cities. But that's the reason why it's going up. And so it's very illustrative that these two lots, compared to commercial development and larger lots in the category beneath it, their bulk standards are dramatically different. They take up much more of the lot. One of them is 2 stories. There's very little surface parking. The setbacks are much smaller. So these are all some of the bulk standards that are playing into why that one particular category of commercial is a positive outlier on those trends. And then the rest of your downtown lots are falling into that less than 6,000 square foot lot category, which is also doing really well when it comes to revenue per acre. Okay, go ahead, Brennan. So what some of this is getting into, and one of the major points I just want to leave us with tonight is that the biggest impact you can make on the fiscal side when you're talking about development patterns really is about people space. So there's a trend or a practice, really, an approach and appraisal methodology that as things get more spread out or bigger, the value per capita goes down. So when lots get bigger and bigger, no matter where they are, the value per square foot is going to decrease. And that's not true for structures. As structures get bigger and bigger, they increase. And so what you'll see in commercial areas is that lots that have a big structure for people on it that cover up a large amount of the lot, they're going to generate more revenue per acre, and they're going to pay for themselves a lot easier than other commercial lots are going to. So if a commercial lot has a large surface parking lot next to it, or if it has really large drainage facilities next to it and it's only 1 story, it's just not going to do as well. And so that principle is true across the board. So what you have here on the left is the chart for single family homes. And in the green line, you have the average improvement area. And it's very uniform. It doesn't really change that much. So what that's telling us is that across your different lot sizes, the size of the home really isn't changing that much. So when you go from a 1 acre to a 5 acre lot, that's a 5-fold increase. The home and the structure is not also increasing 5-fold. It's actually increasing very, very little. And so you can see that at the yellow line that the lot sizes are going up, but the improvement sizes are staying the same. And then the chart on the right is a similar chart, it's just doing commercial lots. And so you can see they stick together a little bit more, and that's just generally the nature of commercial lots. They have a bit more space per person, so they're gonna take up a bigger percentage of the lot. But it reinforces this idea that when we're looking at these bulk standards, things like setbacks or lot coverage or minimum or maximum building heights, it's going to play a big role in how your individual uses perform. So we'll take an approach and we'll look at the use breakdown of how the zoning districts, the proposed ones, are going to perform. And then within that, it's just going to be the practice that we need to take to look at inside the use of what's the best way to capture a bit more revenue out of those uses. And it's going to focus a lot on building space for people. Oh, sorry, I keep hitting my arrows. Brennan, the next slide. Oh, that's a new slide. So we're going to use a term called a floor area ratio. And so what that's going to describe is just the amount of structure per dirt. So if you had a 1 acre lot and then you built a 1 acre building right on top of it and it covered the whole lot, that's going to be a floor area ratio of exactly 1.0. But if you have a 1 acre lot and you build a ½ acre building and it only covers half the lot, that's going to be a 0.5 floor area ratio. And then if you go in the other direction, if you had a 1 acre lot and built a 2-story building, that's going to be a 2.0 floor area ratio. So the floor area ratio is a really good way to summarize your bulk standards. It's not something that we're going to be able to codify that much because developers typically they're going to need more details in what that actually means for the project. But it's a good way for us to track and kind of assess how those bulk standards are impacting the fiscal side. So if we go to these, I think what the last slides are going to be, go ahead and go to the next. Oh, no, we're going back to, okay. So with this idea of floor area ratio in mind, when we looked at the first charts that were like this, the line part of the graph and the bar charts didn't really line up that well. There wasn't a very strong correlation between the two. And in fact, on the single family homes, the line was going down the whole time and the bars were going up and down. And the same thing happened with commercial. But when you throw in floor area ratio instead of just lot size, there's actually a very strong correlation between your revenue per acre and your floor area ratio. And so this is some of the underlying justification of some of the data points we're going to use to illustrate the impact of our bulk standards. And so you can see on the left, the single family homes, the line almost follows the floor area ratio precisely. It's a really good metric to look at when you're trying to ascertain how well your single family residential lots are going to do, because some are going to do better than others. And then on the commercial side, on the chart to the right, you have a much closer relationship or a stronger correlation between the floor area ratio and the city revenue per acre than you did in the initial chart that was showing lot sizes. But something that's unique about commercial, and this will come into play too in industrial, is that you have to be careful not only in your setbacks and your building height, but your parking. So these valuable improvements that you're making, most of the value is going to be locked up in the building or all the spaces that are designed for people. And so the more space you have or require from a developer that is geared either towards vehicles or towards just open space or landscaping, it's going to have a diminishing effect on your revenue output. And that's okay. It's just a matter of identifying what is the right relationship that we're looking for in fate to find the built environment that is really exciting to everyone, and then also matching it up with the revenue production that's also exciting for everyone.
So quick question, and it's more curiosity, because on the commercial side, I clearly see a gap in there at the 6 to 11,000 square foot lot segment. I'm sorry. So I'm seeing a gap on the commercial side with the 6 to 11,000 square foot lot size segment. Just curious as to what's different that's not driving as much revenue in that space. Is it just overparked? What's the difference? Because it seems like, at least just looking at it, it ought to be a fairly straight line, but there's clearly a gap in that particular bucket. And
Felix, the gentleman is asking about the 6 to 11,000 square foot lot, why there's a dip there compared to the other lots that, it's usually a pretty good line.
Yeah, it usually is. It's a pretty good dip. What's encouraging on the front end is that they're both dipping. So it's the bar and the line. And I think what's going on here, some of it is sample size. There were only 3 lots that fell into there. And when you look at those lots, some of them are going to be old. I think one of them was a really old car garage / junkyard that had a big yard behind it. And so it's a commercial use, but when you go to some of the bigger cities, they're going to have a lot more commercial uses in this category that's going to even it out. And they're going to be commercial uses that are newer and built up. And so it's going to move that back up. So almost assuredly, in 20 years, if fate is developing the same way, or even if it develops a lot slower than it is now, this chart with these 2 metrics is going to even out and have a much similar line to the residential. But what's going on here is that the residential has a much smoother picture because the rooftops always come in first. And so as fate continues to develop the rooftops, that's going to generate the demand for all the commercial that comes in afterwards. And when that commercial starts coming in, you're going to see your commercial chart even out and have a much more predictable picture to it.
thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yep. Thank you, Felix.
Okay. No problem. Okay. Oh, great. Examples. So I love these slides. I hope you guys like them. I have a lot of fun talking about these. So here we have some single-family detached homes in Fate, and we're going to go over some of the metrics and the patterns that show up. It's going to mirror a lot of what we talked about already, but it's really fun to see it on the ground and what this looks like. So in the first example, you've got a very large kind of rural estate lot with a very nice home on it. So it's a 2-acre lot. It's got 123 feet of frontage, and it is a 4,100 square foot house. So it's a big house on a big lot. The value of the house is $244,000 at $58 per square foot. The area of the land is 89,000 square feet, and the value of the land is $122,000 or $1.38 per square foot. So what that comes to is an overall value of $367,000. When you apply Fate's tax rate to it, it comes out to $1,200 of revenue. And the floor area ratio at the bottom is 0.05. Okay, so as we move up, you're going to notice that the bulk standards or the bulk dynamics of the lots are going to change. I'm not real sure exactly what the standards were here. These probably supersede the standards, where they're more than what the standards require. So let's go to our next example in the middle. I have to keep moving y'all's faces around, so we're blocking my images on the screen. Okay, so our next one, oh no. Our next one is a half-acre lot with 115 feet of frontage. It's a smaller house, it's 2,700 square feet, and it's a less expensive home, so it's $185,000 just for the structure. The area of the lot in square feet is 20,000 square feet, and the value of the land is also less at $96,000. So the overall value is less, it's $281,000. But if you'll notice, the jump in value per acre goes from $180,000 to $566,000 per acre. And the same is reflected in the revenue. It goes from $600 to $1,900 per acre of revenue actually generated for the city. And the floor area ratio has an increase that is very similar statistically to the increase in the revenue per acre and the value per acre. So this is reflecting what we talked about earlier, and that is that floor area ratio goes up as the bulk of people-centered space increases on the lot. Your revenue per acre is going to go up. What's also interesting to look at when you look at these lots is the difference in lot frontage. So the first lot has 123 feet of asphalt or concrete in front of it that the city is responsible for maintaining. And it's generating less revenue than the second lot, which has only 115 feet of frontage with asphalt or concrete that the city is going to maintain. But even with less frontage, the second lot is generating a lot more money to help cover that cost. And then we get to the third example, which is on a much smaller lot. It's 0.12 acres or 5,500 square feet. It's only got 50 feet of frontage, but its improvement value is actually more expensive than the one in the middle. So it's a 2-story house. So while it's on a much smaller lot, it's got a much smaller footprint, it's still got more improvement area. And so it's going to have more improvement value. And you see that reflected in the numbers. So we went from a 2,700 square foot house to a 3,500 square foot house. Now, because it's a bigger house on a smaller lot, it's going to have a dramatic effect on the revenue numbers. So the land value is substantially higher per square foot. Even though the lot itself is less expensive, we're seeing that principle in appraisal methodologies where as the area gets condensed, the price per square foot of how appraisers actually value it is going to go up, regardless of where it is in the city. So you have a total value of $323,000 on this really small lot, and it's going to generate $1,100 overall, which is not that different than the first two, but it's $8,700 per acre in revenue for the city. And that dramatic increase is also reflected in the floor area ratio number at 0.64. So even when you're just looking within a single use in the single family detached neighborhoods, there's ways that you can adjust the development code to still allow for use that a lot of people still really like, but also is in some regards financially okay for the city. We just have to be really careful with the bulk standards and how far you want to take that with how much revenue you expect to get out of single family. Brennan, next slide. So we're going to keep climbing the floor area ratio ladder, and we're going to move on to multifamily. And so we've got these examples, and you're going to see similar trends. So I'm going to go through it a little bit faster. The first example is 2- and 3-story apartments, which are pretty typical from the 90s and 2000s. It's a $13 million development pattern, and it generates $4,900 per acre, and it's got a 0.5 floor area ratio. So for the lot at large, with a 0.5 floor area ratio, it means that if you just spread out all of the people-centered, people-built environment, it's going to cover half the lot. But because it's stacked up in 2- and 3-story structures, the footprint on the lot is a bit less when you look at it. So moving on to the next example, the one in the middle, it's got a lower floor area ratio, but the revenue per acre is still pretty similar. It's $4,900 to $4,400 per acre. Now, some of this is going to be just because it's newer. It's a newer construction, and it is uniformly 3-story. And so that is going to have a higher value for the structure itself. And it's densely built. But what's impacting, what's not allowing it to go much higher than the first example is that it's on a much larger lot that's got floodplain on it. So it's something to think about. We can do as much as we want to with the bulk standards and the uses, but there's going to be some impacts that we really can't control or that have a different kind of return on investment by saving the floodplains or keeping development out of it. So in this case, almost half the lot is undeveloped, but the developed part of the lot is done in a way that is still a really good revenue generator for the city. And then the third example has a 3.9 floor area ratio. So it's almost 4 times the footprint of the lot itself. And when you see a dramatic increase in floor area ratio like that, you're also going to see that reflected in the revenue per acre, which we do. You jump from around $4,500 per acre for the first two all the way up to $36,000 per acre in the next one. And so this is where it's a big transition in floor area ratio, and it's a big transition in city services. This is typically where you're going to see a lot more bicycle pedestrian infrastructure and maybe even transit infrastructure if that's something that's in the works. And you're going to have even just a whole different set of developers and a different set of kind of a different approach to the review process. So there's a lot of value to be captured there. And from what I've read from the comp plan and heard from the city of Fayette, this is something you have in the works as far as the land use pattern goes. So it's exciting on the revenue front, and the compounding effect on revenue for development like this is that you're not only increasing the improved area per acre, so you're getting more property taxes, but you're getting a lot of people here. And so when you have developments like this on the front end, you're getting such an influx of people that you're also fast tracking the arrival of your commercial development. And so you're also going to start reaping the benefits on the retail sales tax side. Now, next slide.
Hey, Felix, one quick question here. Because you currently have one multifamily development under construction, I'm looking at Ryan or Justin. Which one do you think that would fit? Would it be the middle one, do you think? Because these examples are from outside the city of Fayette. But they're, Felix, correct me if I'm wrong, you calibrated these with the Fayette numbers, correct?
Yes, so the properties are in Rockwall, but the revenue generation is calibrated for Fayette's tax rate. So if these properties were in Fayette, this is how much revenue they would generate.
I'd say that actually, as far as the FAR goes, I think we're a little bit higher than the first one, but that's probably the closest as far as how that ratio is going to work. Of course, it's going to be a brand new build, and it's going to be 3 stories, so your FAR is probably going to be a little bit higher, and the values can be greater, but I would say that's probably the closest. We're definitely not to the one on the right yet. We just don't have the infrastructure to support that yet, so that's my take on it.
Felix, I was just trying to compare that new development by the Fresh by Brookshires that which one this would align to. It's kind of between, just for the Plan Commission's benefit, kind of between example 1 and example 2 when it comes to the FAR. So I just wanted to give a relevancy to what they've approved here already compared to what is out there.
Mm-hmm. And there's also, I won't go, this is a rabbit hole that it could go down, but I'm not. But I'm going to let you peek down it. So another advantage, not only the revenue per acre in apartments is really cool or really high, but apartments like this tend to come with lots of public amenities, and they're privately funded. They're funded by the people who live there. And so it's almost like having an HOA with a really nice pool. And so it's got some other benefits associated with it. It bumps your retail sales tax and stabilizes your commercial base, but it's also providing some pretty interesting public facilities that the city doesn't have to maintain and pay for, which is always nice. Okay, our last 2 examples I think are up next. Yes, so mixed use. So mixed use is really interesting because most of the time when you just look at a land use chart, for a lot of cities with big downtowns, it's going to be your highest earner, like by far. It's going to just outpace everything. It's going to stick out on the 3D map. But what's interesting about mixed use is it's uniformly a high earner, mostly because it's built densely. And so it's naturally got that high floor area ratio. So we've got 2 examples here that, again, they're not from Fayette, they're from Garland, but they're calibrated for Fayette's tax rate. And so on the left, what you have is Garland's downtown. And it's got the traditional kind of old Texas downtown vernacular. It's all built up to the street. It ranges from 1 story to 3 story. And it's a very walkable environment. But the floor area ratio, if you'll notice, is not that different than the first 2 mixed use apartments that we looked at. It's about half, about a 0.5 floor area ratio. And the revenue per acre is also very similar. It's $4,300 per acre. Now, what you are getting out of a mixed use, which is a huge boon, is that you're getting retail sales tax, you're getting a destination place. And so just beyond the property taxes, you're also getting these other financial benefits and social benefits that communities typically value very highly. And so the second example, the one on the right, has a pretty high floor area ratio. It's 2.31. It's still not as high as that one apartment unit we looked at on the last slide. That's 4 stories and completely built out on the lot. But I really like this example, one, because it's a high floor area ratio. It's got a little bit more open space, and it's not a vertical mixed use, it's a horizontal mixed use. And so what you have on the north side are your apartments, and then on the south side, on the southwest corner, you have actually City Hall for Garland. And then to the east of that, you have a parking garage that's shared. And so the floor area ratio is really high. The revenue per acre is really high, which is really good. You've got a mix of uses, which is great on the same block, but you may not have that idyllic mixed use where it's commercial on the bottom and residential on top. But it's still functioning very well, and it's still generating a lot of revenue for the city. The other really nice thing about this approach to development is that the floor area ratio would be really much, much higher if City Hall wasn't there. Because City Hall is tax exempt, so you've got a 4-story building there that is completely tax exempt, isn't generating any revenue. And if you look at it one way, they're like, oh man, you're killing the revenue of that lot. But if you look at it another way, there's a lot of cities that would build that City Hall as a 1-story building with a surface parking lot over the entire lot. And if they had done that, if they'd taken that approach, none of that $17,000 per acre would be there at all. And so they applied the bulk standards of a really high ROI to their own buildings. And it created space right next to it to make additional buildings that do generate lots of taxes and do generate lots of revenue. And on top of that, it generates a really good street life when you mix the uses like that. It's a really good mix of the parking. So the parking is able to shrink down a little bit because it's shared, and it's going to be used at different times during the day. So you're also saving parking from going in other places, which is opening up more land for tax revenue generation. So these are some of the things that we'll be thinking about and discussing as we use the fiscal analysis data to kind of analyze and assess some of the bulk standards and use standards that are going into the UDO. That was my last slide, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
That was a lot of math.
So Ryan, as we're looking at commercial, mixed use, multifamily, whatever, is the FAR going to be something we start looking at going forward, or is that?
That's something that we're talking about. We have the lot coverage ratio and height standards, which in the end translate to an FAR, or at least a maximum FAR. So whether we're going to add it to our zoning district standards, we have yet to determine. We don't have that now, obviously. But I think even if we don't add it as a regulatory tool, it can still inform our other regulations, our other design standards, right. And also, as Felix was mentioning, what that means from the financial side, because that is going to inform what ultimately our design standards are going to be for these zones.
Right. If nothing else, as I'm sitting here thinking about it, we haven't at least today codified the public to private partnership ratios.
That's right.
That's something we share during the meetings. It might be, if for nothing else, good information to have during any consideration.
Absolutely.
Any other questions for Felix? Otherwise, we'll move on here. I think, Mark, you're taking this slide, correct?
Sure, I'll take the non-mass. I'm happy to take the non-mass slide. This thing that looks like an overweight robot is just designed to make the point that what we're talking about here is not developing something that requires any kind of payment from developers or obviously from city residents, because when we talk about codifying the fiscal impact tool and we run through the numbers that Felix did a great job of presenting to y'all, the question becomes, and Ryan just stole my thunder, I think, by telling you, I think, what we're planning to do with this. This is going to feed into the metrics we develop in the zoning districts. It's going to feed into minimizing things that inhibit the kind of coverage, the kind of floor area we need to generate that fiscally, and I'll I don't like jargon, but that fiscal resiliency that he's presenting to you, so that once that development occurs, we have a pattern of residential, commercial, and mixed-use development that minimizes the amount of maintenance we have to do and maximizes the revenues the city is going to get just based on the way its current property and sales tax revenue situation is set up. So none of this will require developers to pay anything more. At the end of the day, it's something that has a lot of potential to minimize fiscal impacts on city residents over time, while at the same time achieving a lot of the other things you'll read about in the comprehensive plan, and that Felix alluded to as well, like great walkability, street life in Old Town, better mixed-use development outside of downtown as opposed to a sprawling and what some people think is an uninteresting big box pattern of development. So that's what this is designed to achieve. And the tool, when we codify it, is something that's going to feed into how we set those metrics. It can feed into discretionary land use decisions like conditional uses and planned unit development. If somebody just can't make something work under the standards that we've got, that's something we would take a look at, and we'd say, okay, well, we have a model for you. Let's plug the numbers in. Let's see what we can do to make sure that over time, this is something that's a positive for the city and not a negative, and gets us closer to that ratio that we've described, that 1:22 ratio that Brennan told you about earlier. And I wanted to mention too that this is something that, however we codify it, we're sort of in our early stages of thinking through how that exactly would work. We want it to be something that we don't have to change all the time. We don't want to write something that's based on today's numbers, and a year from now, 6 months from now, 5 years from now, it's completely outdated. It's more of a performance type of metric that we can update internally from time to time as we need to do based on current numbers and current revenues, but we don't want something that in year 2022 is locked in, and in 10 years from now that those numbers don't work anymore. So, that's something we want to build into this tool that we're looking at adding to the Unified Development Ordinance. So with that, Brennan, I'll let you proceed and talk about how this could, what this could look like.
Yep.
In the UDO.
Cool. So what we wanted to show you guys tonight is some early renditions of how we could potentially transform, but relay out your code here a little bit that's not only user-friendly for Ryan and his staff, but also for the development community to kind of bring some, again, it brings a little bit more predictability into the things that we're looking to measure here. So we just started to go down a road here of an example of what, for instance, your residential suburban density could look like. So it would be, right now you guys have kind of a one-page spread within your code. You have some diagrams that are pretty consistent all the way through on each one of them. But what we wanted to do is kind of, to bring in the character what you guys are looking for. We would have kind of a purpose statement, some imagery. Each of these districts, what we want to do as part of codifying the fiscal stuff is we want to inform, the developers and the residents what that is, so that we are going to probably be replacing one of these images that just kind of has a fiscal note that talks about what each of these districts will be. We are working with Felix right now to kind of have a front end portion before you actually get into your designs or your district standards. That's going to talk about the fiscal implications of the different zoning districts and what it actually means. So again, it's a tool that we're going to be able to help educate not only the residents but the developers, but it'll flow all the way through. So that is something that we're working on right now. So again, each one of the districts we're recommending to kind of have this a two-page spread. So on the right-hand side, from an axon standpoint, it really kind of shows when you start looking at some of the bulk standards and setbacks and everything else, what we we'll be doing, as we progress through the modules here, we will be calibrating that. So we're going to be coming back with you guys with different lot, minimum lot sizes or maximum lot sizes. For example, do you guys maybe want to regulate home sizes? I'm not saying that's what we want to do, but again, going back to the FAR, there's things that you guys will see in the next time we're here that'll calibrate some of those things. But that'll all get built into the standards that you see on the right-hand page, where we clearly align what we're talking about with these graphic images of different lot setbacks and sizes and things along those lines. So this single family would be pretty traditional. When you get into more of your character districts and more of your mixed use or commercial districts, this is where it's probably going to get a little bit more intensive in the sense of the bulk standards, in the manner to ensure that we build a character that, again, you guys spent a year on creating this vision for the community. You have a set vision. Let's bring predictability to your community by incorporating some character standards. So this is just, again, an example layout, for your Old Town core, where, again, you'd have your purpose statements and the imagery that would represent the types of development that you guys support. There would also be a fiscal data, a little bit more intensive fiscal data on the right-hand side. We're still working through what that would actually look like. But again, it helps educate the developer. So as they are looking at your code, they're looking at the standards, they can understand you guys have a set pattern, you guys have a set vision. How does that align with the type of development that they are looking to build into the community or bring forward for consideration? The second page would be, again, a little bit more intensive type of bulk standards. That this is where we start looking at, again, how do you build the public realm that you guys desire, the walkability, the pedestrian zones, the wider sidewalks, where do you put your street trees? There's a lot of things that we can go into. On the right hand side, we're still going back and forth of what we can or can't regulate, from the state statutory requirements. But again, on the right hand side, you can start seeing where we talk about like, for example, the active depth. That's where you start seeing street type A, B, and C. Again, clear direction to developers and residents of what they are going to be looking for, what your expectation is. It provides the guidance to Ryan and his team, so when a development comes forward, it will bring a more predictable type of environment to you for consideration. So this is just a sample. We haven't finished it yet. This is kind of like the module 3 later on, but we wanted to at least start to get you guys to think. This is also a recommendation that came out of the IDA report and study that they did, is legibility, readability as well. So that's why we are suggesting this type of potential layout and diagrams to better illustrate, the environment and what you guys are looking for.
Just to kind of build on that, one of the things that our code audit told us was, in the current presentation, we provide a plan view and a horizontal and a vertical view of the different zoning standards, but it doesn't really relay the scale of the development. So if it's a commercial lot with a commercial building on it, it doesn't look any different than a residential lot with a residential building on it. So having this a little more detail in these axon views really gives a clearer indication of what we're expecting to see and how that scale relates to the public realm. So I think this is a really nice change from what we have now. It's a more sophisticated presentation of the data and the regulations and the expectations of the city.
I see your attorney over on the left-hand side looking at one of the images. We still have to work through some things, but obviously we can't regulate building materials. We know that. But again, what we can regulate is the bulk. And if you go 3 stories, do you require like the second or third story to be stepped back a little bit from the public realm? Those are the types of things that we have not started yet, but we will be working on as part of that process.
So back on building materials, and I've kind of been on this in my time on this commission because they changed the regulations right as I came on. I know from a state perspective, we cannot regulate building materials, but I know there are other cities that are doing things that absolutely allow them to regulate it. And I guess I'm curious, since we're going through this process right now, it seems like the perfect time to figure out what other folks are doing to get around it, because I know Rockwall's got a very stringent process they go through. I know the city of Frisco has a very stringent process they go through, and I don't know if that involves greater use of plan developments or what, but as we're doing more and more of this, I just, anything we can do to make sure buildings are built with the materials that we prefer, even though the state doesn't allow it. I know other folks are doing things. It's just a matter of.
Yeah, in short, the answer is you can't do it by ordinance.
Right.
So one of the ways that you can kind of work with some of these developers, or if you know, what other consideration would the city be giving them in their development where they would want to contract? So it's not by ordinance, but it's through some other agreement, development agreement or something along those lines, where they agree to specific building materials, a certain specific aesthetic, in exchange for something else. So there's this exchange there, and those are. You know, I've worked with a lot of cities that have said we don't like doing development agreements because we feel like we're giving too much away. But now the way that the state legislature has kind of put cities in this position where you can't do it by ordinance, so you almost have to go this route where you're working to try to find a partnership where it works for them and works for the city as well. I'm speaking about their development.
Right.
So there's other ways to do it. You just can't do it by ordinance.
Right.
What's that?
Historical districts. Doesn't the ordinance allow you to regulate?
Yeah, with some exceptions like historical districts, as Ryan's mentioning, yeah.
Yeah, I think everybody's nightmare scenario is, you know, one of the smaller highway commercial lots being built as a cinder block building or something. It's just not what anybody wants. So as we're going through this, and then also does it make sense, since we're going through the process right now, to, even though we can't hold folks to building materials code, to go ahead and put it in code if state law changes down the road, so that we don't have to come back in and update. We already know what the standards are that we like, or have a pretty good idea from our old code. I'm just throwing that out there.
I like it. You're optimistic. I probably wouldn't. But understand that if it does change, I mean, because you want to be updating your ordinances, your development standards from time to time anyway. So you leave yourself in a position that if it ever does, and we can regulate that by ordinance, that we can, we're ready. We've had it in there before. We can put them in there again. But just to avoid any explicit challenges for developers who are wanting to come and looking at fate that may be of a litigious mind, just to challenge it on its face. And so even though we're not going to enforce it, right, I think it's probably just easiest to leave it out.
And obviously Mark is also, we appreciate having Mr. Thatcher here as the city attorney, and also Mark has done a lot of this as well. So we will definitely build, hopefully, again, as we go through this process and Mark gets into more of the nitty-gritty details. I mean, as part of this code update, we'll have kind of a development review process and a flow chart hopefully built into there as well. So it could potentially trigger some of those mechanisms that would hopefully get some of those potential standards that you're looking for as well, because it's a requirement as part of the process. We're not there yet. It's something we want to work with Ryan and his team on. But exciting things, and with this type of character code and everything else, we've had early conversations with Ryan and staff about, depending on where different areas is, you can also build in opportunities for kind of, I would say, incentives per se, in the sense of, you can go higher to maybe reduce some of the parking and things along those lines. So those are some of the things that we'll be bringing back for recommendations and considerations as we go through the process a little bit more. But I do believe that Mark is going to take it home here with just probably the couple of the, I don't want to say boring things, Mark, but just some of the things that we have to deal with. So
That's right. This will wind you down as you get ready to go home and turn in for the night. So, but this is important. How we deal with non-conformities. It's both an equity issue for people who've already invested in property, run a business for years, with an expectation that they're able to do something, and also a legal issue, because state law has things to say about what we can and can't do with non-conformities. We can't, for example, just immediately force somebody to conform to our new regulations if they're not in compliance lawfully today. So there are different types of nonconformities, use of structures, lots, and sites. Next slide. This one is just kind of a schematic that shows you a nonconforming use. In this one, you have the black squares are commercial, and the brown ones are residential. The yellow's a residential district. The red's one of our new commercial districts. And if you had a commercial use that's been there forever, before we changed the regulations to residential, or even before we put zoning in place here, it has a lawful right to continue. We recognize that today in the Unified Development Ordinance. We can restrict its ability to expand, or sometimes in some contexts we can just recognize that it's conforming if it's in the right place, if it's in an area that's adjacent, for example, to Old Town or some other place where something like that maybe makes sense. But we wouldn't want it to grow to the point where it starts to creep into existing stable residential neighborhoods, for example. So that's the first kind. Next slide is non-conforming structures, and the middle one shows a structure that just happens to peak over your front setback. So the use could be compliant with the zoning district. It's just that the structure extends over a setback or higher than the building height. What's going to be interesting about the way we're reconfiguring the code, and I think some of your existing districts do this as well, and it sort of turns things on the head, is when we have a maximum front setback, for example, as opposed to a minimum, or what the form-based coders call a build-to line, and a minimum frontage build-out, because we want those buildings to occupy the street frontage. We want to make the streets walkable, for example. And what if you have a building that's further back from the street than we now require? That'll create some interesting ways that we can address how and where that existing building, which isn't going anywhere, can expand. And so we can encourage it to maybe build additions that are closer to the street, maybe eventually form a courtyard type of element or something along the street. So that'll create some interesting things for us to address, the way the new code is being written. Next slide. Then we have nonconformity as to lots. So if we have a minimum lot size or a minimum lot frontage or minimum lot width, sometimes if an existing lot is nonconforming with that, we need to recognize that, allow something to happen on the property. So usually we require them to comply as much as possible with the existing, with the new zoning, but conform as much as they can to the setbacks that are in place, which are tougher as lots get smaller. And one thing we're doing with some of the new districts is lots will get smaller. The permitted lot width will get smaller. We're looking at what we're doing with frontages, and I don't think this is going to be as much of a problem with the way the new ordinance is written as it is with the conventional zoning structure anyway, but nevertheless we need to go with it. And then the last one is, what if you don't conform to parking? What if you don't conform to landscaping? What if your building design doesn't conform? We're looking at regulating the composition of building, not building materials, but how the building is oriented to the street, the composition of the building facades, those sorts of things. And again, you'll have some existing buildings in place that don't comply with those. And so they're allowed to continue as well, but they may want to expand. They may want to expand to the rear, to the side, and et cetera. And so there are different ways to deal with that as well that we're exploring. And so the next steps, what you're going to see is, internally, we're in the drafting process right now, and staff is looking over our shoulders and giving us comments on what we're working on. And the next thing you're likely to see is our internal 100% draft of the first module that y'all can comment on. There's still, when I call it 100%, that just means it's internally consistent. We think, it would be a viable ordinance if it were adopted, but nevertheless, y'all might want to make some changes or suggest some changes. Other members of the public may want to suggest some things as well, and there's time to do that, and that doesn't mean it's a done deal. And then we are already in the process, and we'll be working on that second module we showed you, which is just a smorgasbord of other things before we really dive into our full-on implementation of what was in your code audit. And so that'll be the next thing you see, probably in May or the July meetings. So those are the next steps. We're drafting away and letting you all know what we're doing and taking your comments as we go. So any questions? I appreciate y'all being here, your attentiveness. You had some great questions. From what I was able to hear, I'm like Felix, we have a hard time hearing everything, but I appreciate your attentiveness and your input on all of this. That's going to make this a better product when it comes to you for adoption. So any questions or thoughts on what you've heard tonight? Anything, as Brennan asked, anything you didn't hear that you wanted to? Anything you heard that you really, really like or really are concerned about?
I also have to say, hopefully we did not scare off the two brand-new Plan Commission members. That this is their first meeting tonight, so.
I guess I just have a process question is, as you're making these changes, when do we start seeing drafts as you're completing these modules?
Mark, would you like to take that? When do you anticipate for the Plan Commission to start seeing drafts?
I would say probably over the next month, we'll start to see drafts of different things in the ordinance.
And we generally prepare these in a strikeout underline format, so it's really clear. Unless it's a total rewrite, it'll point out exactly where those changes are occurring.
Okay.
And we meet with Ryan and the internal team every 2 weeks to kind of go through these different standards and everything else, and then they'll be passing it along to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? I echo Mark's. Go ahead, sir.
So will we only be focusing the UDO part in our special meetings, or will we be addressing this in our regular P&Z meetings as well?
Yeah, so it's expected that there may be some presentations similar to this, maybe not quite as robust, but in our special standing meetings as well. Okay. I think I sent out the total project agenda earlier on. Given where we are now, I'm going to go back with the team and revisit it and see if we need to make any shifts to the dates, because that inevitably has to happen sometimes. Right. And I'll provide an update, especially with our 2 new members. I'll provide an updated overall project schedule so you can know when to expect some other check-ins.
Okay, perfect. Because I'm looking at our next check-in like this is June 2nd, it looks like.
Yeah, I think that I thought our next special meeting was in May, but I could have been wrong. Is it in June? Okay. Yeah, so there may be something in May at the standing meeting if there's some material to cover.
Perfect. Any other questions? All right, a lot of information. Thanks, guys.